I think I accidentally turned my professor's son. The moment Dylan Chase had me pinned against the wall, kissing me, his entire family walked in. I thought I was done for, but then my professor let out a sigh of relief. Finally, someone to tame that little monster. His wife smiled genuinely. A little work-life balance is healthy. Just remember to study after you're done kissing, you too. Dylan's little sister piped up, "Mom, Dad, if my brother can have a boyfriend, can I have a girlfriend?" My graduate advisor, Professor Chase, is a man in his 40s. He's usually all business and a bit intimidating. But he saw a lot of potential in me and would often call me into his office to discuss academic problems one-on-one. In his spare time, he'd chat with me about his family. The topic he brought up most was his disobedient son. "If that little hellion of mine were half as well behaved as you, I'd be a happy man. If he'd just cause a little less trouble, I wouldn't have all this gray hair in my 40s. My son, he's already had to repeat his senior year, and he still won't focus on his studies. He completely bombed his last practice test. If he wasn't my own flesh and blood, I'd have knocked him into next week. He's 19 but still acts like a total punk. He's going to be the death of me." After hearing so much, I started getting pretty curious about this rebellious son. I wanted to see for myself what kind of troublemaker could push my professor to this point. My chance came sooner than I expected. My professor got sick, and I volunteered to visit him on behalf of my class. I bought a fruit basket and made my way to an upscale, gated community. I rang the doorbell. After a moment, the door opened. A guy in loungewear answered. He was a head taller than me, with messy bangs falling over a strong brow. He had long, deep-set eyes, with a small scar just under his right one. He stared at my face for a long moment before finally speaking. "Yeah." Took me a few seconds to find my voice. "I'm here to see Professor Chase." He pursed his lips and stepped aside. "Come in and wait." He went to the hospital for a follow-up. "Should be back soon." I nodded and followed him into the living room. He paid me no mind and went straight upstairs. I set the fruit basket on the table and sat on the sofa to wait. A little while later, the guy came back down in a different set of loungewear. The collar on this one was cut particularly low, offering a faint glimpse of his chest muscles. He sat on the sofa across from me and crossed his legs. "You must be Martin Miller. My dad's mentioned you." I nodded, guessing this had to be the rebellious son my professor was always talking about, Dylan Chase. He was actually pretty handsome. Not long after, my professor returned and we chatted for a bit. I was planning to leave, but Professor Chase insisted I stay for dinner. It was hard to refuse his hospitality. I had no choice but to agree. At the dinner table, Mrs. Chase kept piling food onto my plate. I just kept saying thank you and buried my head in my bowl, eating as fast as I could. Professor Chase shot a glare at Dylan. "Do you have any idea what Martin got on his SATs?" Hearing my name, I looked up. Dylan, sitting across from me, didn't even raise his head, acting as if he hadn't heard a thing. Professor Chase continued, "He got a 1550. If you could score that high, our ancestors would be smiling down on us from their graves." Dylan suddenly put down his chopsticks, raised an eyebrow, and let his gaze fall on me. Since Martin's so smart, maybe he could tutor me. Professor Chase was so stunned his jaw dropped. He'd told me before that they'd hired countless tutors for Dylan, but every single one of them had been driven away in a fury. For Dylan to ask for it himself was a huge shock. Professor Chase looked at me. "Martin, are you free on the weekends? Could you come over and help teach this son of mine? Name your price." With him putting it like that, I couldn't really say no. I nodded and agreed. On Sunday afternoon, I arrived at the Chase residence. Mrs. Chase led me to Dylan's room. When she opened the door, Dylan was lying on his bed, shirtless. Sunlight from the window illuminated his tan skin. Perfect 8-pack was on full display. I could even faintly see his V-lines. I hit the gym whenever I have free time, and I've only managed a 6-pack. The envy was real. I stared at the sight, practically drooling. Mrs. Chase smacked Dylan on the back of the head. "It's the middle of the afternoon and you're still sleeping. Were you up all night playing video games again? Get up. Martin's here to tutor you." Dylan rubbed his sleepy eyes. He slowly sat up, looked at me, a faint smile playing on his lips. His voice was still raspy from sleep. "Morning, Mr. Miller." Mrs. Chase smacked him again. "It's the afternoon, you idiot." Then she smiled at me. "Martin, I'm leaving this little monster with you. If he gives you any trouble, just smack him. If he dares to hit back, you let me know." With that, she closed the door and left. Dylan stretched lazily and looked at me. "Where should we start?" I frowned slightly. "Maybe you could put a shirt on first." I couldn't tear my eyes away from a body like that. He stood up, his tone laced with amusement. "Nah, it's hot. Hot." The weather was pretty cool today. I was wearing a light jacket and felt fine, but he was saying it was hot. Since he put it that way, I didn't press the issue. I had him pull out his last practice test. It was a sea of red X's. I nearly blacked out. I took a deep breath and started going through the problems one by one. After explaining a problem, I turned to him. "Got it?" He was resting his head on his hand and quickly averted his eyes when I looked at him. "Got it." His reaction was a little strange, but I didn't think much of it. I asked him to explain it back to me. He confidently picked up his pen. He wrote "solution," and that was it. My fists clenched. It was a simple problem. If he had paid any attention at all while I was explaining, "There's no way solution," would be all he could manage. He definitely wasn't listening. I was so mad, but I held it in. I chanted silently to myself. "He's all brawn and no brains. He's just a kid." After calming down, I picked up my pen and forced a smile. "Dylan, buddy, let me explain it one more time. Make sure you listen carefully, okay?" I sounded like a kindergarten teacher. 2 hours passed. Mrs. Chase brought in a plate of fruit and 2 glasses of iced lemonade. Dylan accidentally knocked over my glass. The water spilled all over me. I shot up from my seat. My white t-shirt was soaked, turning practically transparent. It clung to my abs, which were faintly visible underneath. I grabbed some tissues from the table to wipe it off. Soon, I felt a burning gaze coming from my side. I looked up, confused. I found Dylan staring at me in a way that wasn't normal. His dark eyes seemed to swirl with some intense emotion. He even swallowed hard. When he realized I was looking at him, he said, "You should change. You can wear one of my shirts." I nodded. He pulled a white t-shirt from his closet and handed it to me. I took it, intending to go to the bathroom to change. But as I stood up, he stopped me. "Just change here. We're both guys. It's not like you have anything I haven't seen." I hesitated for a moment, then pulled off my shirt. When I noticed Dylan staring, I turned my back to him. A soft chuckle came from behind me. "Nice back muscles, Martin." I'm usually happy when people compliment me, but when he did it, something felt off. Maybe it was the way he was looking at me, a little too intensely. In any case, I felt completely uncomfortable. I hurriedly pulled the new shirt on. His shirt was a little big on me. It looked a bit loose and baggy. The collar was wide, too. But I was focused on tutoring him and didn't pay it any mind. I pointed to a problem. "What do you see in the question?" "There's a mole on your collarbone." My brain screeched to a halt. What did he just say? Is he nuts? He wasn't looking at the problem, he was looking at my collarbone. I instinctively covered my chest and looked at him in alarm. "I'm not gay." He looked up calmly. "I wasn't either. But you turned me. Now you have to take responsibility. Is this some kind of scam? What did I even do to turn him?" He suddenly moved closer, a smile in his eyes, his hand casually landing on my thigh. His warm palm rested against my skin. "Martin, has anyone ever told you that you're really cute when you blush?" My heart skipped a beat. I pushed against his chest with both hands, trying to shove him away. Not only did he not budge, but he grabbed both of my hands. Through the thin layer of his shirt, I could feel his hard chest muscles. I tried to pull my hands back, but he held them tight. He had this innocent smile on his face, but his grip was incredibly strong. I had the distinct feeling I'd walked right into a trap. Just then, Dylan's sister, Chloe, burst into the room. Her eyes fell on my hands, which were still pressed against her brother's chest. A slow smile spread across her face. "I'm so screwed. If his sister told our professor about this, he would absolutely kill me. I was here to tutor and his son ends up gay. Even though I was completely innocent from my professor's perspective, he'd definitely think I had something to do with it. I snatched my hands back. I ran over to Chloe. She just smiled at me. Feeling guilty, I tried to explain I was just giving your brother a massage. She smiled without saying a word. I was panicking internally. I had no choice but to resort to bribery. Chloe, is there anything you want? I'll buy it for you. She tilted her head and thought for a moment. Anything? I nodded. Just then, Dylan walked up beside me, frowning at Chloe. Who said you could come into my room without knocking? Chloe looked up at Dylan. Are you and Martin secretly dating? I frantically shook my head. No. Dylan glanced at me, then looked back at his sister. Yeah, we are. This is grown-up stuff, kid. Get out. Chloe huffed. I'm gonna tell Mom and Dad about you and Martin right now. Dylan just shrugged. Go ahead. I felt all the strength drain out of my body. I quickly grabbed Chloe's arm. Please don't tell your parents. Chloe grinned. I want ice cream, but Mom and Dad won't let me have any. I sighed and nodded. I'll bring you some next time I come over. But you have to promise you won't tell your parents about this. She nodded. At dinner, Mrs. Chase had me stay again. Dylan sat across from me. Throughout the meal, I was on pins and needles. My professor suddenly spoke up. Martin, did that kid give you any trouble today? Across the table, a wicked smile played on Dylan's lips. I wanted to strangle him, but I forced a smile and shook my head. No, not at all. He was very well behaved. The professor beamed. Martin, if my son can get a decent enough score on his college entrance exams this year to get into a 4-year university, I owe you a big reward. I nodded. Suddenly, I felt something brushing against my calf. It was gently rubbing up and down my leg. A shiver ran through me. A tingling, electric feeling spread through my entire body. I looked up and met Dylan's playful gaze. It hit me. The thing rubbing my leg was Dylan's foot. My professor and his wife were right here. The thrilling fear of being caught, combined with that tingling sensation, was overwhelming. I shot up from my seat. My professor looked at me, confused. What's wrong? I gave an awkward laugh. I just need to use the restroom. I spent a few minutes in the bathroom trying to calm down, splashing cold water on my face. When I came out, I saw Dylan leaning against the wall, waiting for me. Right now, he was scarier to me than a ghost. I flinched and backed into the bathroom. He just chuckled and strode toward me. I had nowhere to run, retreating until my back hit the wall. He didn't stop, closing the distance step by step. Finally, he leaned down, his mouth close to my ear. His hot breath ghosted over my earlobe. So, was that exciting? My breath caught. I ducked down and scrambled out through the gap beside him. I bolted. Sunday came around again all too quickly. My steps were heavy. I really didn't want to tutor him anymore, but I couldn't think of a good excuse to refuse. I hid the ice cream I'd bought for Chloe and managed to sneak it into Dylan's room without his mom seeing. Chloe was already there waiting. She took one and left, completely satisfied. I had bought 3 tubs. I put the remaining 2 in front of Dylan, then kept my distance. Here. He raised an eyebrow, picked one up, and started eating. Then he offered the other one to me. How are you going to tutor me from way over there? If he were actually focused on tutoring, would I need to be this far away? The complaint was on the tip of my tongue, but I swallowed it. I worked up my courage, took the ice cream, and sat down next to him. He suddenly asked, "What flavor is that?" I glanced at it. Strawberry. He pouted. I wanted strawberry. I frowned. I've already eaten some of it. He stared at me intently. I don't mind. I cursed him out in my head. Well, I minded, but I still held the ice cream out to him. Here. His gaze turned fiery. He pushed the ice cream away and kissed my lips. It took me a second to process what was happening. After a few moments, I finally reacted, shoving him away. Are you insane? He licked his lips. Strawberry really does taste better. But I'm not done yet. With that, he kissed me again. Only this time I couldn't push him away. Instead, he pinned my hands. The door opened. Dylan, did you give your sister ice cream? Dylan and I whipped our heads toward the doorway at the same time. His entire family was standing there. My professor froze for a second. Sorry to interrupt. Carry on. He turned and left. Mrs. Chase blinked. She smiled. A little work-life balance is healthy. Just remember to study after you're done kissing. Okay? Then she left too. Chloe thoughtfully closed the door for us. I was dumbfounded. I had not anticipated this reaction from his family at all. Before I could even process it, Dylan used his hand to tilt my chin up, his voice husky and alluring. Shall we continue? I snapped out of it, frantically slapping his hand away. We can't do this, I said sternly. He looked at me innocently. Can't do what? I was speechless. He was playing dumb, and there was nothing I could do about it. A knock sounded at the door. Mrs. Chase pushed it open. Dylan, your cousin's here. Come out for dinner. Then she looked at me, her eyes shining with unconcealed delight. Martin, you join us too. I had just been kissing her son, and she seemed thrilled about it. For a second, I truly wondered if this was all a dream. It wasn't until I saw Dylan's cousin that I was certain I had to be dreaming. How could the world be this small? How could I run into my ex-boyfriend here? Mark Reynolds and I stared at each other for several seconds before I managed an awkward smile. Dylan said, then explain to me this is my cousin, Mark Reynolds. I nodded, planning to be upfront about our history. I held out my hand. Nice to meet you. Mark froze for a second, gave me a deep look, and shook my hand. But he held on for a long time, not letting go. Dylan frowned slightly, his gaze flickering between Mark and me. I pulled my hand away and took a step back. A flicker of disappointment crossed Mark's face before he looked down and let out a soft laugh. Professor Chase called us over to the table. Dylan grabbed my arm and leaned in close. You two know each other? I shook my head and sat down. Dylan immediately sat down next to me. I kept trying to dodge the scrutinizing looks he was sending my way. During the meal, Professor Chase suddenly said, Martin, I remember you're a physics major at Northwood University, right? I nodded. Mark's a physics major at Northwood too, and you're the same age. Have you two met before? Mark smiled. We were in the same class. And we were roommates. I forced a laugh. Yeah, old classmates, haha. Dylan suddenly reached out and pinched my waist. Hard. I turned to look at him and found him squinting at me. I carefully scooted my chair away from him. Away from this inexplicably weird person. But he had no shame. He pulled my chair right back, even closer than before. I shot him a discreet glare. Fuming, I gave up, and just focused on my food. After dinner, I went to Dylan's room to get my bag. Just as I stepped inside, the door clicked shut behind me. I spun around to see Dylan walking toward me, his face dark. I hugged my backpack tighter, on guard. What do you want? He didn't answer. He just kept advancing. I backed away until I hit the wall. What the hell do you want? He cornered me completely. He put a hand on my chin, tilting my face up. His cool voice was tight with anger. You two used to date, didn't you? I blinked. Wait, how did he guess that? I didn't answer. He laughed, but it was a bitter sound. Martin, Martin, Martin. You told me you weren't gay. I was planning to take my time to win you over. Was it fun messing with me? Okay, so I lied to him. But what was I supposed to do? I just didn't want him to get any funny ideas about me. I forced myself to stay calm. All right, that's enough. I'm leaving. Move. He sneered. No. But since you are gay, this just makes things easier. He suddenly cupped my face and kissed me. I couldn't push him off, so I had no choice but to let him. From outside, we heard Mark's voice. Dylan, is Martin in your room? Hearing that, Dylan bit my lip hard. I let out a hiss of pain. Only then did he let go. A satisfied smile on his face as he looked at the cut on my lip. I stared at him, bewildered. A kiss is a kiss. But why did he have to bite me? Dylan? Mark called out again. Dylan turned and opened the door. I wiped my mouth and slung my backpack on. Mark glanced at Dylan. Then his eyes landed on my face, and his brow furrowed. What happened to your lip? I froze for a second. Then I understood Dylan's little game. The little punk was more cunning than he looked. I smiled. I bit it by accident. Mark just said, oh, then added, let me walk you back to campus. There are a few things I wanted to talk to you about anyway. Before I could answer, Dylan cut in. I'll go with you guys. I could use a walk to digest. The university wasn't far from my professor's house. About a mile. We decided to walk. Dylan walked right between Mark and me. Mark suddenly slowed down, and before I knew it, he had jogged around to my right side. He looked at me. Martin, did you change your number? The first thing I did when I got back to the country was call you, but it wouldn't go through. I nodded. I got a new one when I graduated. Mark pulled out his phone, smiling. Give it to me, I'll save it. I've never been good at saying no to people. I started to recite my number. Dylan suddenly interrupted. Martin, can you explain the satellite orbital transfer problem to me again? I didn't quite get it when you went over it today. I paused. I'd never seen him this eager to learn before. Mark's gaze fell on Dylan, his voice cold. Cousin, if you're so dedicated to your studies, you shouldn't have come out with us. You should go back and prepare for your exams. If you do well, I'll get you a big gift. Dylan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'll do my best, but I can't figure it out on my own. I need Martin to teach me. Mark forced a smile. Great. So impressive. My slacker cousin suddenly getting so serious is honestly a shock. The atmosphere grew tense. But thankfully, we'd reached the campus. I could finally escape this pair of bizarre cousins. I smiled. You don't have to walk me any further. I'm here. You guys should head home. Bye. Mark called out, Martin, let's get dinner this weekend. I didn't say anything. Mark's expression dimmed for a second, but it passed just as quickly. He smiled. Just dinner. I'll bring my boyfriend. I'd like to introduce you too. We've been good friends for so many years, after all. He had a boyfriend? He continued, by the way, Martin, do you have a boyfriend? There was no way I was going to say no now. I rose to the challenge. Of course I do. He raised an eyebrow. Then bring him to dinner. It's a date. Fine. He smiled. I'll head out then. After Mark left, Dylan stared at me with a smirk, his tone dripping with mockery. Where are you going to find a boyfriend in a week? Martin? I shot him a glare. None of your business. With that, I turned and walked away. That weekend, I spent a ridiculous $200 to hire a fake boyfriend. As soon as I arrived at the restaurant, a pair of hands covered my eyes. He didn't speak, but I already knew who it was. Dylan, are you stalking me again? Dylan chuckled softly. He glanced at the guy I'd hired. You can go, he said flatly. Then he stuffed $500 into the guy's hand. I frowned at Dylan. What are you doing? If he leaves, who's going to be my boyfriend? Dylan raised an eyebrow. Isn't there one standing right in front of you? I'm free and effective. You should give me a try. Before I could argue, Mark and his boyfriend had already walked up to us. He looked at Dylan, confused. What are you doing here? Dylan slung an arm around my neck and quickly kissed my cheek. Mark's face fell. He stared at me. You're dating him? I nodded reluctantly. Mark took a few seconds to recover. That's great. At the dinner table, Mark's boyfriend poured him a glass of wine, then poured 2 more for us. Let's have a toast. I froze. Mark was allergic to alcohol. Did his boyfriend not know? As Mark raised his glass to drink, I thought about the time he'd accidentally had a drink with alcohol in it and ended up in the ER within 4 drip. I quickly shouted, that's wine. Did you forget you're allergic to alcohol? A flicker of emotion crossed Mark's eyes. I completely forgot. I smiled. Be more careful next time. You'd think you'd have learned your lesson after how bad it was last time. I didn't realize when Dylan had grabbed my hand. He squeezed it hard, and I looked at him, confused. What now? What did I do to set him off this time? He stared at me, muttering under his breath. What's this? So concerned about your ex? Still have feelings for him? Want to get back together? I yanked my hand away. You're overthinking it. He leaned in close to my ear, hissing, you'd better hope that's all it is. You're mine now. If you even think about having feelings for someone else, I'll deal with you. When did I become his? Mark peeled a shrimp and placed it in my bowl. His tone was intimate. You always loved it when I peeled shrimp for you. You'd refuse to eat them otherwise. I sat there, stunned, and snuck a peek at Mark's boyfriend. He was just focused on eating, completely unbothered that his boyfriend was peeling shrimp for me. Dylan picked up his chopsticks, snatched the shrimp from my bowl, and popped it into his mouth. After eating it, he had the nerve to say, "Don't thank me, 'cause since you love peeling shrimp so much, peel a few more for me." Mark forced a smile and silently started peeling more shrimp. He'd peel one and Dylan would eat it. The entire plate was gone before I got a single one. Mark wiped his hands and looked at Dylan. "Your lip, is it swollen?" I looked over and was startled. Dylan's upper lip was noticeably swollen. "Are you allergic to shrimp?" I asked. He touched his lip. "I don't know. I never liked seafood, so I've never really eaten it." I grabbed Dylan's arm. "Come on, we're going to the hospital." At the hospital, I sat by Dylan's side while he was on and 4. Mark walked up to me. "Martin, there's something I need to tell you. Can you come outside with me for a minute?" I stood up, but Dylan grabbed my hand, looking like a kicked puppy. "I'll wait for you here. You'll come back, right?" I didn't get it, but I nodded. Once we were outside, Mark leaned against the wall, a smile in his eyes. That boyfriend was just someone I hired. I haven't dated anyone since we broke up. I was stunned for a moment. "Actually, I'm not with Dylan either." His eyes lit up. "Really?" I smiled. "We're adults, but we're still acting so childish." He laughed too. "Martin, actually, I cut him off. It's not going to happen." During our junior year of college, Mark decided to study abroad. He gave me 2 choices: a long-distance relationship or a breakup. He promised he'd fly back once a month if we stayed together. But I didn't want that. I chose to break up. Our breakup was peaceful. I even saw him off at the airport when he left. He gave a bitter smile. "I get it." Then he turned and walked away. I went back to Dylan's side. He leaned in close. "What did you guys talk about? Does he still like you? You didn't agree to go anywhere with him, did you?" I pushed him away, annoyed. "Dylan, my life is none of your business. I'm just your tutor. That's it. If you keep this up, I don't think I can tutor you anymore." He froze, a look of undisguised disappointment in his eyes. "Do you think this is moving too fast?" "It's okay, I can take it slow." "Dylan, I don't like you, okay? It doesn't matter how slow you go, I still won't like you. Just stop it." I really had no feelings for him. "Then what do I have to do for you to like me? Tell me. I'll become whatever you want, won't that work?" I sighed. If only he was this determined about his studies, would he have had to repeat a year? "All right, I don't want to talk about this anymore." "I'm not giving up," he said firmly. I glared at him. He was as stubborn as a mule. He wouldn't listen to anything I said. Then, an idea struck me. "Fine. You want me to like you? I like guys who are smart. If you can get into Bradford University, the same school I'm at, I'll be with you." A guy who bombed his practice tests with just a month left, trying to get into a school like Bradford? It was practically impossible. He stared at me for a moment, then said seriously, "Deal." The following Sunday, I went to tutor Dylan as usual. He was clearly much more serious than before. Previously, he'd try to get handsy or make suggestive comments while I was teaching. Now, he was completely focused on his studies. This wasn't so bad. It put a stop to his advances and made him study. During our break, Dylan didn't pester me for a kiss. He just kept working on problems. Professor Chase called me out of the room. He grabbed my hand, emotional. "Martin, I can't thank you enough. I never thought I'd live to see my screw-up of a son take something so seriously. I can die with no regrets now." Mrs. Chase added, "He's been getting up at 6 every morning, going for a run, and then studying. He even memorizes vocabulary words while he's eating lunch. When he gets sleepy, he splashes cold water on his face." I barely recognized my own son. I was a little surprised myself. He was really trying that hard? When I went back to the room, I found him asleep at his desk. I sat down quietly, but the sound still woke him. He rubbed his face and pushed a workbook toward me. "I still don't quite get this problem." I nodded and started explaining it to him. He looked absolutely exhausted. He almost dozed off several times. Watching him, I felt a strange, unnameable feeling in my chest. You should sleep for a bit. I'll wake you up later. Okay. With that, he rested his head on my shoulder. His arms wrapped around my waist. He nuzzled my neck with his nose and took a deep breath. Martin, you smell so good. My face flushed. I was about to push him away, but he held my hand. His voice was raspy. Don't. Just let me lean on you for a bit. Okay? My heart melted. A strange feeling bloomed inside me. I didn't move. I just quietly let him lean on me. The college entrance exams ended. I hadn't seen Dylan since his last test. It was like he had vanished. He probably checked his practice scores and knew he couldn't get into Bradford. So he stopped bothering me. But my heart suddenly felt a little empty, like I had lost something important. Professor Chase called me to his office. Martin, thanks to you, Dylan scored a 1420. We're planning to enroll him at Kingswood University. It's just a mile from your campus. I smiled. Congratulations. My professor's brow furrowed. But the kid doesn't seem happy about it. He's throwing a fit, insisting he wants to take a gap year and try again. He says he has to get into Bradford. He's not even speaking to me because I won't let him. I didn't say anything. By the way, are you free tomorrow? We're throwing a celebration dinner for him at the Bradford Hotel. You have to come. A huge part of his success is thanks to you. Okay, I'll be there. The next day, at the hotel, I ran into Mark as soon as I arrived. He walked over to me. Martin, you did a great job, getting that little punk into college. It was his own hard work, I said. He suddenly grabbed my wrist. I'm planning to stay in the area for my career. I'm not leaving again. I just nodded. That's nice. His expression was sincere as he continued. Is there really no chance for us? I looked at him seriously. Mark, there's really no chance. Whatever we had ended the moment we broke up. He sighed. All right, but I still feel lucky I got to be with you. I tried to comfort him. You'll find someone better. He smiled and nodded, then asked, you like Dylan, don't you? No, I blurted out. Then, not even believing myself, I added, I don't think so. Mark put a hand on my shoulder. Martin, we dated for 3 years. I can tell when you like someone. I don't know. Not seeing him these past few weeks. I did kind of miss him. Dylan, when did you get here? I followed Mark's gaze. Dylan was staring at Mark's hand on my shoulder. His expression was utterly heartbroken. Sorry to bother you. With that, he rushed past us. I think he misunderstood. Aren't you going to go explain? Mark said from my side. I watched his retreating back. Let's just leave it. At the dinner table, Dylan sat far away from me. Everyone was happily congratulating him on his incredible comeback, calling him a dark horse. But he wasn't happy at all. He just sat there, scowling and drinking by himself. Professor Chase drank a lot too. Eventually, almost everyone had left. It was just me, Mark, and the Chase family. Mrs. Chase and Mark exchanged a look, and the two of them went to help the professor home, leaving me to handle Dylan. By then, Dylan was slumped over the table. I walked over and shook him gently. Why did you drink so much? He blearily opened his eyes and saw me. Tears welled up. He looked like I was the one who had bullied him. Martin, you did this on purpose. You knew I couldn't get into Bradford, so you said that to get rid of me, right? You just like Mark. He's smart, so you like him, right? Besides grades, how am I not better than him? Why won't you even look at me? His eyes were red. It was pitiful. All right, you're drunk. I'll take you home. He shook off my hand. I'm not going home. I'm going to do another year, get into Bradford, and be with you. My heart felt like it had been struck by something. It trembled. My pulse was racing. I could feel it myself. This feeling, it was far more intense than anything I had ever felt with Mark. Dylan pushed me away and staggered outside on his own. I followed behind him. Every time I tried to help him, he would shrug me off. Then, he missed a step and tumbled down a flight of stairs. And that's how he ended up in a cast at the hospital. I brought a fruit basket to visit him. His lower leg was in a cast. He was just sitting on the hospital bed, staring into space. When he saw me enter, he flinched, then quickly looked away, pretending not to care. I put the fruit on the table and sat in the chair next to his bed. Feeling any better? He didn't speak. like a sulking child. No, that's exactly what he was. If you're not gonna talk, I'm leaving. I made a move to stand up. He panicked, just as I'd expected, and turned his head. I'm better. You're not allowed to leave. I smiled and patted his head. There's a good boy. He looked dazed. What do you mean by that? I played dumb. What do I mean? I'm just petting a sulking puppy's head. He froze for a second, then grabbed my hand tightly. Don't play dumb with me. I cut him off. Okay, so you didn't get into Bradford University. But in light of your excellent performance, I'll say yes. He sat up straight. You'll say yes? When it finally sank in, he pulled me into his arms. You promised. No take-backs. I don't care, you're mine now. I'm never letting go. Dylan's perspective. The first time Dylan saw Martin, he fell in love. It was the first time in his life he'd ever felt that way. He had only one thought in his head. He had to have him. At first, when Martin said he wasn't gay, Dylan wasn't worried. He could take his time and win him over. Until his cousin, Mark Reynolds, showed up. Martin had dated his cousin. And his cousin clearly wasn't over Martin. He lived in constant fear of losing him. Then Martin rejected him completely. But Martin gave him an opening. If he got into Bradford University, he would consider it. Grades? That's all? He thought he could handle that, no problem. The reality, however, was that his score was miles away from what he needed for Bradford. He couldn't bring himself to face Martin. He locked himself in his room, and Martin never came to find him. He realized Martin probably knew he couldn't get in and had said it on purpose. He was furious, but he was mostly furious with himself for not getting into Bradford. At the celebration dinner, he saw his cousin's hand on Martin's shoulder. That was the first time his heart truly broke. He'd always been the type of person who got what he wanted, no matter what. This time, he had failed. At the dinner table, everyone congratulated him, but he felt no joy. He could only drown his sorrows in alcohol. When he sobered up, he found himself in the hospital. The events of the previous night slowly came back to him. Just then, Mark walked in. Dylan didn't want to talk to him. Mark just started talking to himself. When you two get together, you'd better not bully him, you hear me? Dylan froze. Mark continued, Martin rejected me. And I think he likes you. Dylan looked at him, confused. Really? Mark just smiled. Just wait. And he was right. Martin really came. He never would have guessed that Martin would actually agree to be with him. He held Martin tight. Thank God he hadn't given up.